I failed so many different interviews in my entire life, and so I thought it'd be a really good idea to talk through some of those interviews that I've had and things that I've learned from them so that hopefully you guys don't fail nearly as many interviews as I've failed before you actually land a job in tech. So the first lesson I learned is that careers are really long, and so a lot of times, or at least for me, I really fixated on getting into specific companies out of college, but I forgot the fact that you can always reapply next year. And so I think I put so much pressure on myself to land in these giant tech companies out of school when in reality, you have almost endless opportunities to re-interview with those companies every single year. And I remember when I came out of school, it felt really crazy to think if I don't get this now, I'm gonna have to reapply an entire year. But as I've gotten older and older, it feels like a year just goes by faster and faster. So don't be afraid about not getting into the company on the first try that you really want to work at, because you can always reapply at a later date. The next lesson I learned, there's a lot of different companies out there, all of which are actually great to work at. And so even though you might be shooting for some of these really big FANG companies or large tech companies, if you don't get into those companies, that's totally fine. There's so many other dozens and hundreds of different companies that you could work at that you're going to have a good time at, that you're going to learn at, that you're going to have a good experience at. And then from there, you could use that as a stepping stone to get into bigger, better, larger companies that you actually might have been trying to get into initially. So don't get discouraged if you don't get in the first time. You can go work at some other company that I'm sure will be awesome and you'll really very much enjoy before you go to some other company that you've been trying to get to the whole time. The next thing that I learned is that most of the process really is just about practice. If you actually really care about getting into very specific companies or very hard companies to get into that are really competitive, you just have to practice. And there's literally hundreds of different resources online that you guys can take a look at and can try and use to your advantage to get into some of these larger companies. You guys can go look at some of the stuff that I've done in the past and things that I've built to try and help people get into different tech companies, especially larger ones. But just remember that, like anything else in life, a lot of it is just about practice. And if you put in the practice over time, I'm sure you'll get closer and closer to your goal and eventually achieve your goal of getting into one of these companies. Similar to the idea of practicing, another thing that is luck. Again, it's like anything else in life. There is a degree of luck involved in every single thing that you do. And this is no exception, right? Any interview that you have, you might have heard the question before, you might really just click with your interviewer. And obviously these companies try and make the interviews as much of a science as possible. They really try and make sure that there is no luck involved or as little luck as possible and that every candidate has a uniform experience. But at the end of the day, you can't control 100% of the process, right? I might get a question that I've heard before, and that obviously is going to affect my interview. I actually had one friend who got into Uber who looked at one question before his interview, and the question he got was the exact question that he looked at 5 minutes prior. You could either be really lucky or you could do your best to try and work really hard and also hopefully have luck on your side the day of your big interview. The final thing that I learned, large tech companies especially tend to have a very high bar. And the reason for that is because they get so many different candidates. And so they can actually afford to pass on candidates who would probably do a good job because they think they can wait for someone else who they can guarantee with more certainty will do a better job at the job or have more certainty that they'll perform the way that they want them to. And so while this is really stressful, it's actually really helpful for 99% of all your other prep. If you're trying to really work in these really large, big tech companies and pass their interviews, you'll probably have, I would say, almost no problem passing smaller companies' interviews or medium-sized companies' interviews because, again, you're preparing for such a high level, such a high bar. So those are some of the things that I've learned from failing countless interviews throughout my career so far. I hope that you guys enjoyed these tips. I hope they were helpful. If it was helpful, be sure to drop the video a like, subscribe to the channel for more. I'll see you guys next time.